there's a tension there where everyone in Washington, on one hand, wants to tout the U.S. as the partner of choice and talk about regional partnerships and alliances. But whenever the leaders in Riyadh or Abu Dhabi or elsewhere make a decision that's viewed as somewhat adverse to Washington's interest, for instance, the oil cut by OPEC Plus this last fall, I think there's politicians from both parties have a tendency that's almost reflective to sort of punch down at the Gulf states, and there's a public wondering about why we even bothered to have these relationships and a gnashing of teeth. How can Washington reconcile this political impulse to keep, on one hand, these partners at arm's length while fulfilling these regional policy goals, these security goals, to strengthen them so the U.S. has greater capacity to ultimately pursue its global objectives?
Relationships matter. Bottom line, relationships matter. And I firmly believe in those Gulf states, and recently went through many of those nations, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and had discussions with leaders of those nations. So sat down with MBS in Saudi Arabia, and we talked about a number of very hard issues. And it's difficult because we need to foster relations with these countries because they matter. Those countries matter if we want peace and stability in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia is a leader in the Middle East, whether you like it or not, whether you think they are a pariah nation or pariah state, as our president keeps calling them, whether you believe that or not, they are an important player. And I firmly believe that if Saudi Arabia had not behind the scenes given the green light to the Abraham Accords, they would not be in place today. So we need to continue working on our relationship with Saudi Arabia. MBS is young. He is going to be around for a very long time. I know there was a lot of teeth gnashing when it came to OPEC Plus and their decision to cut oil production. I had a conversation with Ambassador Rima around that decision. And, bottom line, the Saudis will say, you Americans need to produce more of your own energy. And I do believe that as well. But if you look back with all that teeth gnashing, did it really drive the cost of our gasoline up much? Not much at all. No, it didn't, folks. It didn't. So the OPEC Plus, we can set that aside. I know there's a lot of teeth gnashing going on right now as well. Folks, that's their decision. We can do what we need to do here in the United States. But again, relationships matter. And we had the opportunity to sit down with MBZ as well in the UAE. We need American leadership. And whether our president is willing to engage or not, I can set that aside because I am going to engage because I believe those partnerships matter. We need to engage those nations. We need to make sure that we are working with them, that we are supporting them with foreign military sales, that we are supporting them with a number of initiatives which will bring these nations together. If we don't, they will find other partners of choice, whether that is China, and in this case, Iran. They will work on appeasing Iran. It is about their own survivability. And if the United States is not going to be there with them, for them, they will find other nations to work with. And I would much rather be their partner of choice and have a seat at that table in the Middle East than push it off to Iran or to China.
So start with a slightly different direction. I'm a moderate. And why I go there? Because I believe moderate is a style, not a position. Right? You can be moderate from the left, moderate from the right. Moderate says, I think this is important, we don't always start with the world we want. We start with the world we have and figure out how to get there in steps. And I think what you have seen, again, why the Abraham Accords bring Democrats and Republicans together, it's the moderate aspect of it is UAE, Bahrain come together, and we got to make sure they continue to build on that. The other thing is, as we look around the world, it's a different world today than it was a generation, or certainly at the end of World War II, where the United States was the only choice. Today, countries are looking around the world and seeing all kinds of threats, and we need to make sure, and we need to work together to ensure that the United States is the best choice for a partner, and those partnerships are critical. So where the extremes that you touched on in our politics attempt to swing the pendulum very far one way or the other, the more that pendulum appears to potentially swing, the harder it is for us to build those relationships that the Senator touched on that are so important to make sure that these countries are going to be there with us. We still are in the best position. We have the best military. We have the best military technology. We are leaning in on our values, and we understand our interests, and we need to make sure our strategies reflect that. And in particular, when we're talking about the Gulf and the broader Middle East, know what we're hoping to achieve, be in a position of strength so that decisions others might make that we don't like, we're not put over a barrel, but that we retain our position that you may zig today, we're going to stay with you to help you to zag back to where we're going, because in the end, we're all trying to get to the same place. And so the United States engagement, the cultivation of those relationships through CENTCOM and the creation of less structured agreements like the Abraham agreements, or more structured agreements like the Eastern Mediterranean agreements on petroleum, building those institutions and making sure that we're always taking that step forward, knowing what our values are, but not letting perfect be the enemy of good is critical if we're going to continue to move forward, because there are challenges. We need to be clear-eyed on those challenges, but we also need to be equally confident that we have our goals, we have our interests, we have our strategy, and we're going to pursue it.
And if I can add, because I think Brad makes an exceptional point, that we need to be that steadying influence. And we have seen different directions from different administrations on so many different levels, but Congress can be that convener. We can continue to engage with our partners in that region and provide that steadying influence, because many leaders around the world will question, will the United States be there for us in the future? You know, if you have one president that says one thing, one president that says another, will they be there for us? And I think it's good that you have bipartisan support for these nations in Congress, so that they know, yes, the United States is there with us, even in divisive times.
Sure. I'm going to get to an audience question momentarily. And I have actually two questions that I'm going to kind of push into one to make sure we all have time for it all. But you did, Senator Ernst, you brought up the role of China in the region. So irrespective of some of the political challenges of working with Gulf partners here in Washington, China's current and growing presence in the Gulf imperils those relationships to a degree. Chinese investment in infrastructure projects that ultimately mask a military or intelligence presence could make sales and cooperation with the U.S. Impossible to achieve. What message would you both share with Gulf leaders and Israel about their willingness to welcome Chinese investment and what that would mean for our relationship?
I can start. Look, China has its interests. China has a great dependency on foreign oil, unlike the United States, and they're going to pursue their interests. I think it's imperative for the United States to be clear that stability, that whether it's a Democratic president, a Republican president, Democratic Congress, Republican Congress, we're going to stay engaged in the region. Our interests are going to stay consistent. Sending that message that the United States is not only a great partner, but the best partner, but you don't get to have your cake and eat it too, is going to be critical. And having those conversations before China gets too far down, a relationship with China gets too far down the road. These countries are going to sell oil to China. It's in their interest. It's a global economy. That's a fact. But their reliance on the United States for their security and their confidence that the United States will always be there to help secure their nations and the region is our role, so that they don't say, well, I have to hedge my bets. The less they have to hedge, the better position I think we're in.
Yes, and moving forward, I think it's still important that we are engaging, just as Brad has outlined. And we can do that in so many different ways, whether it's diplomatic, it's economic, it's of course, economic will be a big play because that's where China uses their influence significantly is buying loyalty. But we can engage in those ways as well. So diplomatic, economic, informational with the collaboration we do between the nations. I think all of that is important. Going back to the military aspect, though, as well, China extends different opportunities, training opportunities, mill-to-mill relationships, but the partner of choice is always the United States as well. We have taken officers enlisted from a number of these nations, trained them in our academies, in our schools across the United States, in various aspects of our military. And every one of those countries that I visited just in the last couple of months, when we talk about those mill-to-mill relationships, which is incredibly important to them as we look at security cooperation, they all mention the U.S. Central Command Commander, General Eric Kurilla, by name. He also is out there actively engaging. So not only do they need the stability coming from Congress in a bipartisan way, but also understanding that those mill-to-mill relationships will be steady regardless of political party in charge, whatever it may be, but that we have brothers and sisters in arms working together and fostering cooperation between our countries. So it extends across what we call the DIME model, the diplomatic, informational, military, and economical. It extends all through those, and we just have to keep up with those partnerships in order to drown out the noise that's coming from China. Their presence, yes, it makes a difference if they're engaging in Huawei and others on their military installations, if the Chinese technology has access to U.S. military technology. That's pretty much a game stopper. But we are pretty clear about that when we're speaking to our friends in the Middle East. There needs to be a clear line between what the Chinese are doing in these countries and what we're able to do in those countries.
Just a quick anecdote to reinforce what Joni was saying. I had students from the U.S. War College visit. They were on the Hill and they came to my office and there were pictures. And back home, people were asking me, well, who was the guy sitting next to you? It was a mid-level officer from UAE. And his uniform obviously looked different than the others. They said, well, why was he there? And it's just to your point, it's those relationships. When I pointed out, these guys, they were lieutenant colonels, colonels, equivalents. In 10, 15, 20 years, these are the people who are going to be leading our military. And the relationships we have established today are going to help ensure the success we have working together a generation from now.
I'm going to have one last question and quickly turn to our in-person audience, but you mentioned the importance of relationships. General Kurilla has got one of the hardest jobs we have in this country, where he is traveling to the region, doing defense diplomacy almost constantly. But we've seen from this administration recent visits, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, Brett McGurk and Amos Hochstein have been in the region near constantly. And of course, right now, we've had Secretary of State Blinken in Riyadh. He met with MBS for almost 2 hours. I think we can all assume Israel normalization probably was a significant part of that conversation. So I'm curious on your perspectives a little bit about what are the prospects for normalization. We've seen press reports that Saudi Arabia is looking for a lot from the United States to make that happen in terms of security guarantees, nuclear energy support, I'm sure a laundry list of things. How forward-leaning would you both be in making concessions to Saudi Arabia to close a deal? And what do you think a timeline looks like?
I would say I am actually pretty forward-leaning when it comes to Saudi Arabia. I think their partnership is incredibly important, and I think that MBS and the Saudi family have been very forward-leaning when it comes to their own culture and their own civilization, with so many of the the Vision 2030 goals already coming into place. If you look at the advancement of women's rights in Saudi Arabia, they have come so far in a very short period of time. So I do think that the Sauds are working very hard on this and that they're moving forward. And I think that shows to the West that they are serious about making some changes in their own culture. And they are westward looking, they're not eastward looking. And so that gives me some assurances there. I think that we can actually, and you call them concessions, I don't know if I would call them concessions. I think we can find partnerships in those areas where we can work together, whether it is arms sales, whether it is nuclear technology, whatever that might happen to be. I think we have to work together. I don't see it happening overnight, let me say that. But I do think that we can work with them in a productive way that will not only benefit Saudi Arabia, but will also benefit the security of the United States and our people and our friends and partners in that region.
Yeah, I agree 100%. You know, I was just visiting my university. They installed a new president, and we were talking about what was my favorite class, and it was negotiations. And what I learned a long time ago, and it has served me well throughout my career in business and in here, and it's true in diplomacy, don't focus on people's positions, focus on their issues. What are they trying to achieve? Where are they trying to go? So I agree with the senator. It's not a matter of what concessions are we willing to make. It's a matter of how can we address the challenges and promote the aspirations of both, in the case of the Abraham Accords and Saudis joining, the Saudis and the Israelis, to help secure that relationship. This would be a phenomenal achievement. Rumors of by the end of the year, I would celebrate that all day long. But make sure as we do that, we are addressing the concerns and issues that everybody has and finding a way to lay out those timelines, build those stepping stones, and make sure we're on a path that is achieving the goals of everyone in the region and also protecting the United States' interests.
People are going to come at me with pitchforks if I don't end this session, but people are also going to come at me with pitchforks if I don't take a quick question from our audience. David Makovsky.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the microphone. Thanks for the very interesting remarks of both. I would really like to ask you both, Senator, Congressman, to follow up on Jonathan's point on the Saudi-Israel push. I mean, it does seem that the administration is prioritizing this issue in the next, 6 to 8, 9 months before the election cycle gets into full swing. And each of you in each of your parties, let's say the congressman with the progressive wing of the Democrats or a wing of the Republicans that might have a different view of the Saudis than the senator does. How much support do you think, each of you think, within your own parties, this administration could garner if they pursue the very path that you just articulated? How heavy of a lift is it going to be? Look, it's clear on the upgrade of security. I don't know if they're trying to get a treaty through the Congress. I mean, I got to believe that's a heavy lift. But are there ways that members of your own party could share your own visions for the centrality of such an administration push? Because I think it's pretty clear a Saudi-Israeli breakthrough is a game changer. It really is transformative in terms of the Middle East to bring these two countries together. So it's going to, we've got some dramatic moments ahead, and I just want to know what's going to be the political support in each party. Thank you both.
Wonderful. Thank you, David, very much. And yes, I would be right there with Brad celebrating all day if we can get this done. And I hope that is in the near future. Obviously, there's been a huge push by so many in Congress, by Secretary Blinken, I'm sure, to engage in this. And I would say from my own party, we have varying degrees of thought on this. I am going to be optimistic. I'll just lay it out there. I'm always a very optimistic person. I'm that eternal optimist in the room. I would say that probably 75 to 80% of the party would support that effort. And certainly because we're just huge supporters of Israel, you will find some pushback on those that are still think a little harshly about Saudi Arabia. But I think that overall our party would be celebrating the fact that we have this cooperation between Israel and Saudi Arabia. I think it would be such a tremendous leap forward in time and allow for greater security in the Middle East and pushing back against an enormous adversary when it comes to Iran. I think it benefits all of us immensely if we can do that. And I think that is large in part the reflection of the Republican Party as well.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's going to be fairly straightforward. I won't say easy, but straightforward on one condition, that there's transparency. We know what's there. I mean, I think back to 1979, 77, when Sadat first goes to Israel. If it wouldn't have gotten to where we had the agreement if not for the work of President Carter and his team to get to Camp David and the Camp David Accords. You can look at the agreement in '94 with Jordan and President Clinton, and you look at the Abraham Accords with President Trump. The U.S. engagement is critical. That's why we kind of glossed over the fact of Secretary Blinken there now, but it's been a stream of people to the region talking about these things. On both our respective sides, there are going to be people who are initially dug into a position, back to what I was saying before, and we're going to have to show them you have your position. It may be based on certain assumptions. Some of those assumptions may be right, but some of those assumptions, if you look again, they're changing. And what's changing on the ground, what's changing in the interactions between the Saudis and the Israelis, Saudis and the United States, you need to take a leap of faith jump on some things and not everything. And when we can show them, this is why the transparency, I think, is so hard. When we can show them that we're not taking a leap of faith on security, we're not taking a leap of faith compromising, for example, Israel's qualitative military edge. We're not taking a leap of faith turning over all of our highest, most advanced technologies without safeguards. Whatever you want to say, we can put those safeguards or guardrails within whatever the agreement is. And I think once we start building the momentum, it's going to go from the middle out. Here, the middle's pretty large. I think I would say we start with the majority out of the gates, and we end up with an overwhelming majority if the agreement is presented to us in a clear and transparent manner.
Well, I hope everyone would just join me in thanking Senator Ernst and Rep. Schneider for speaking with us today. They are leading the way on regional security integration and the future of the Middle East from Congress. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan.